First off, what is a superstition? Despite being based on no real evidence, a superstition is a commonly held belief in the involvement of supernatural forces in life. Broadly defined as an irrational belief derived from the misunderstanding of what causes what. A common component of superstition is that something that happens around you or that you do will have supernatural consequences. There were many widely held superstitions in Elizabethan England and Europe as a whole. These are just a few of the many that were widespread in England where Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. If you opened your mouth and sneezed, they thought the devil had a chance to enter your soul. That's why they said bless you, because they thought a demon couldn't enter a blessed place. Some also believed that the seventh son of the seventh son had somehow acquired supernatural powers. A black cat crossing your path or a rabbit running in front of you was considered an omen of bad luck. Black cats were especially important because people often associated them with witches. More on that later.
Another huge superstition back then was witches. They were notorious for bad luck and for causing bad events. You see, during the 16th to 17th century, there were no damage control services like firefighters or ambulances. Everyone was also pretty uneducated compared to today's standards and didn't know what caused what or why it happened. Every single bad event that occurred back then was mostly devastating, and being the selfish, uneducated clods they were, they had to blame it on something. So they blamed it on witches. Your house burned down? Witches. Everyone's starving due to a massive crop failure? Witches. So your newlywed wife is found dead in a tomb and you decide there's no other course of action than to commit suicide? Probably witches. All your typical witch stereotypes were there as well. You know, the old single lady or lad who is also pretty ugly, wore all black, had a pet cat who is also black, brewed potions, flew on broomsticks. Yeah. Anyways, everyone despised witches. As already mentioned, they were thought to be the sole reason for literally every single event ever. That's why witch hunting was a fairly popular sport during the 17th century. People would actively spy on their neighbors to see if they were a witch, and oftentimes a simple accusation would be enough to put the suspected witch on trial. And it was also a guilty until proven innocent type of society back then, so most of the accused witches were killed, either by hanging, burning at the stake, or by dunking into a river.
Astrology was a huge part in everyday Elizabethan life. Since people knew very little of outer space back then, they thought the alignment of the planets, moons, and stars had direct consequences on daily life. Some people today are still invested in this belief. A couple of examples of the Elizabethans' belief in astrology could be found in certain parts of the play. For example, when the two lovers are confessing their love for each other, Romeo swears on the moon that he loves her with the line,
"Lady, by yonder blessed moon I vow,"
to which Juliet interrupts him and says,
"Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circle orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable."
Juliet is afraid that Romeo's oath will change and become inconsistent, just like how the moon is in an unceasing loop of cycles. Another common belief was that the alignment of planets at the time of birth will determine a newborn's future and fate. For example, we can infer that Mercutio's birth planet is Mercury. Mercury also happens to be the only metal in the periodic table that is a liquid at room temperature. It flows quickly and unpredictably, much like Mercutio's temper, which can change in an instant. He's always looking for trouble and will never back down from a sword fight. After all, he was the one who initiated the fight with Tybalt, saying,
"O calm dishonorable vile submission, Alistocata carries it away. Tybalt, you ratcatcher, will you walk?"
People during the Elizabethan times thought of fairies as bad spirits that were mysterious and caused misfortune and played tricks on others. They were blamed for disease, illness, and any other misfortune like the witches, but not to the extent that witches were blamed. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare talks about the superstitions of fairies when he refers to Queen Mab. Mercutio is the one to bring up Queen Mab when he's talking to Romeo about Romeo's dreams. Mercutio says the Queen Mab is over men's noses as they lie asleep, meaning that she spends her time giving sleepers wild dreams, which can mean that she's giving them mysterious dreams which might be seen as naughty. When then people would blame Queen Mab for having such dreams, when in reality they themselves are the only ones they can blame for being horny.
Ghosts were something most people back the Elizabethan era believed in, and going against that thought was considered foolish. Many people were also afraid that they would be cursed if they didn't think ghosts were real. There were supposedly 3 types of ghosts back then. There was the subjective ghost, the authentic ghost who died without given a chance for repentance, and the false ghost capable of manifestation. When Juliet was just about to drink the friar's vial, she briefly talks about Tybalt's ghost, saying that she sees her dead cousin's vengeful spirit and that he's looking for Romeo since he was his killer. Juliet wouldn't have had these thoughts if she wasn't a believer in ghosts, which she is, just like everyone else in the Elizabethan era.
At the time, religion was a very sensitive topic. In terms of the most accurate belief of God, everyone believed themselves to be right, and the ones who disagreed with them to be very wrong. Since it was such a delicate thing to talk about, if people came across others who didn't see God the same way they did, violence was the most common answer to solve the indifference. In fact, it was so common that punishments for being the wrong religion in a country could get you imprisoned, tortured, and even executed. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare never clearly states what the Capulets and Montagues are fighting about or for. He only announces that the two families hate each other in the prologue of the first act when chorus says,
"From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean."
The reason behind their feud can only be left to the imagination of the reader. And for some readers, based on context and individual mindset, this hatred might spark from the possibility of both the Capulet and Montague family households being of different religions, evident from all the violence they commit in each other's name. Religion being a fragile topic also means that every writer in Europe had to be careful of what they're writing, because their works were read in all parts of the continent. If they wrote something that could be mildly offensive to a higher authority, such as a noble of some sort, they have the power to imprison, torture, and even execute the writer. Because of this, Shakespeare tried to avoid directly talking about Christianity as a whole, but he still used words like heaven and hell to give the audience a proper sense of his character's characterization and the setting of his plots. An example of the use of heaven is when Romeo metaphorically refers to Juliet as heaven in Act 3, Scene 3. He says,
"'Tis torture, and not mercy. Heaven is here where Juliet lives, and every cat and dog and little mouse, every unworthy thing, live here in heaven, and may look on her, but Romeo may not."
Religion also ties into another common superstition of the Elizabethan era, the idea of fate. People believed they had no influence on what happens to them in life, because everything was already planned out. Most often, the planning was thought to be the work of God, or some other supernatural force. The influence of this belief in fates can be seen quite clearly in Romeo and Juliet. Throughout the play, fate is well represented by foreshadowing. Some examples of foreshadowing from the play are the story is full of similar references to fate and its role in Elizabethan society, showing just how big the impact of the belief in fates was.
in all, superstitions were everywhere, from luck to witches to fairies, ghosts, God, and fate. And superstitions are commonly followed today as well. Though they can't really explain its existence or purpose, young kids believe that the moon follows them at night. They believe in the tooth fairy and magic. And some people to this day still believe in luck, witches, fairies, ghosts, God, and fate. Superstitions are everywhere.